Mr. Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Dan Dunn from the Board of Selectmen. Mr. Moderator, there's going to be 3 speakers that will fit well under 10 minutes. I'm going to talk for a few seconds, and then the chairman of the Board of Assessors, Jim Doherty, is going to speak for a few minutes, and then one of the proponents, main proponents of this article, Senator Ken Donnelly, is going to speak for a couple minutes. Just speaking briefly for the Selectmen, the current deferment rate floats, but it doesn't float low enough in the current environment. I don't think we anticipated, or this meeting anticipated, such a low and long period of interest rates. In order to make this deferment a more viable option for our seniors, we think that the rate should be permitted to go lower. The other benefit of the particular rate mechanism was chosen is that it's floating and will automatically adjust upwards and downwards as the federal rate changes. So, from your orange book, it's Article 29, if you just want to give it a read. Mr. Doherty.
Jim Doherty, Chairman of the Board of Assessors, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 2. Thank you, Dan. I've been asked tonight to just briefly touch upon what the qualifications and the various limits and qualifications are for the tax deferral, which we're speaking about in this article. Basically, we have various types of property tax exemptions which reduce your property tax. That could be veterans, blind persons, 2 types of elderly and surviving spouse, as well as widows. Those actually reduce your property tax bill. The exemption we're speaking about tonight does not technically reduce your property tax. It simply defers it to a later date. Currently, you need to be 65 years of age or older to qualify for this particular exemption. You may defer a portion of the tax or the entire tax. You can also defer your water and sewer if you'd like. Currently, the income limit is $30,000. There's another article that will come before you, and that will potentially increase that amount. There are no asset restrictions on this deferral, unlike some of the other exemptions. As I just previously mentioned, the requirement solely addresses the income. A couple of the other criteria in here is that you have to have a primary residence in Massachusetts for 10 years. You must have owned and occupied a piece of property for 5 years anywhere in Massachusetts. There's another restriction, and we don't really see it come into play too often, neither do many other communities, but essentially by deferring your property tax, it can never exceed 50% of the value, the assessed value of the property. Again, we haven't seen that. It would take a fair amount of time before that would kick in, but it is something that people should be aware of before they enter in this. The other thing is that the tax as well as the interest needs to be paid back once the property is transferred or the ownership, or the owner, I should say, passes away. At that time, and I couldn't find it specifically addressed in the statute, but at some point after that, if it is not addressed, then the interest rate would go up to 16%, which is the statutory interest rate. This exemption, as I mentioned earlier, no other exemption can you receive 2. So if you're a veteran and you're an elderly person, you can't receive both. This particular exemption would be net of any other exemption. So anyone who currently receives a property tax exemption that I described earlier simply would still, if they qualify, be entitled to that. They would net that out, and then the net amount would be the amount that would be deferred. The Board of Assessors did not actually take a vote on this. We felt, quite frankly, that we should defer to our Chief Investment Officer or the FinCom, who actually invests our money. There was discussion at the meeting as to the Selectmen's recommended vote, and there was concern about bringing the rate down too much. Historically, I've been on the Board of Assessors for 18 years. We have led the charge to increase property tax exemptions. We do support the whole idea of what we're trying to achieve here, but as I stated earlier, we would defer to someone else to actually decide what they believe a prudent interest rate should be. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ken Donnelly, the State Senator, representing the 4th Middlesex District. And I want to thank the Selectmen and the Finance Committee for taking up this article, Article 29. As Selectman Dunn said, this was an issue that I had looked at. Last spring, we held a forum, elderly forum. It was the Selectmen with the chair at the time, Clarissa Rowe, myself, the assessors, and we did it at the Council of Aging. The room was full with elderly residents from Arlington. And what we heard loud and clear is many of them were struggling and needed help. They looked at the exemptions. Exemptions in many cases were too low. And in a lot of cases, the exemptions we had and the help we had wasn't quite enough to provide them the help we needed. Also, I do my office hours every month at the Council of Aging in every community. I had a gentleman in Woburn come up to me, a veteran, that had actually outlived his pension with him and his wife, and his Social Security was very small, and he was struggling to keep up his house and to stay in his home. I met in Arlington with a gentleman that was also a vet that lived in Arlington for 60 years, and his Social Security, again, was very little, and his money the money he put away was small. So he was having a very difficult time making ends meet. So it made us take a look at some of these exemptions and what we can do for our elderly residents, especially when we had an override that I think was it was good for this community, but in some cases, some of the people that are trying to make ends meet made it very difficult. So this issue, again, I think that Jim is absolutely correct. This is a deferral. This is not a gift. Upon death or transfer, the money is in full. And at that time, if you don't put the money in full, the interest rate kicks in. We're taking a look at that also, but that would kick in immediately. Also, when you look at the interest rate was 6%. This is not a financial issue. This is a social issue. Do we want to keep our elderly in their homes? In this case, the gentleman I was talking to, 60 years in the town of Arlington, wants to stay in his home. That's where he grew up. That's where he lives. And we're not saying it's for nothing. The interest rate would be somewhere around 1 3/4%. And actually, I would love to be able to give him that money and get 1 3/4 because it's a lot more money than I'm getting for my money in the bank today. So 6% was way too high. I think the Finance Committee looked at this issue and they come up with a really good solution. I support that 100%. The Board of Selectmen, I applaud them. I support that 100%. And I hope that we can pass this and think about our elders that want to stay in Arlington. I think make Arlington a wonderful community and give them a little assistance. So thank you.
Thank you. Is that it, Mr. Dunn?
That's it,
thank you. Mr. Loretti.
Thanks, Mr. Moderator. Chris Loretti, Precinct 7. Mr. Moderator, I have an amendment to the recommended vote of the Board of Selectmen. Shall I read it, or do I need to?
Everyone have it? Does the crowd have it?
Everyone should have it.
Okay. Now, we can waive the reading. Just tell us what it does.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The amendment I'm proposing is to keep the formula for calculating the interest rate as it is. Indeed, the interest rate floats already. What my amendment would do is still allow the interest rate to float, but it would set a floor of 4% rather than 6%. And Mr. Good, if you have the handout that I had distributed, would you mind putting it up on the screen? I'd like to talk a little bit about the table at the bottom of that handout. Prior to 2006, Arlington was charging 8% on the property tax deferrals. And right now we're charging a rate that's based on the 10-year Treasury bond, and it's set at that bond, and as I said, it is has a floor of 6% and a cap at 8%. That 8% cap is established by state law. The Selectmen's proposal would reduce the interest rate and use a different index, the federal discount rate, add a percent to that, and that's where that 1.75% comes from. And as I said, what I'm proposing to do is keep the formula as it is, except put a 4% floor on. So essentially tonight you have three options. You can vote for the Selectmen's recommended vote as it is, and currently you would have an interest rate of about 2%, actually 1.75. You can vote for my amendment and have a current interest rate of 4%, or you can leave it as is and have a current interest rate of 6%. Mr. Moderator, there have been a lot of articles this year that seem to repeat things from the past, and indeed this is one of them. We took up the question of the interest rate on the property tax deferral in 2006, and I thought because we are essentially discussing the same thing, it would be instructive to look at some of the comments that were made at that time, because I think they're still applicable. And so what I thought I would do is summarize some of those comments. I'm going to leave out my own, because at that time I was talking a lot about trying to get the town to raise the income limit to $40,000 and instead of $30,000, and obviously I had failed at that. And just to be clear, in case you missed it when Mr. Doherty spoke, indeed we have voted to increase the limit to $52,000 for the current income limit. So at the time we changed to the current formula, the Board of Selectmen had recommended a fixed rate of 6%. There was a fear that that rate was too low and that the rate needed to float as interest rates increased. So the Finance Committee proposed a substitute motion that had the floating rate. And let me give you a few of the statements they made at the time. They chose the 10-year T-bill note because they said it was the benchmark for many adjustable rates, including home mortgages and corporate bonds, and that it was a number that was readily available. And they noted that the interest rate of the 10-year T-note has historically has been only slightly higher than the most easily available conservative investment, commercial certificates of deposit. This rate can therefore reduce the likelihood that a taxpayer would take advantage of the deferral program as an investment vehicle while still charging a fair rate. The fear was that and still is, that if you set the rate too low, people will defer paying their taxes and then invest that money at a higher interest rate than the rate they're paying to borrow. Another point that they made that was very important is that the rate accrued on deferred taxes does not impact the number of seniors eligible for the deferral, and it has no effect on the stated goal of helping seniors remain in their homes as property tax rates increase. The accrued interest only impacts the net proceeds upon the sale of properties, whether by homeowners or their heirs. And it's important to point out that for anyone who takes advantage of this program, they pay nothing on those taxes while those taxes are being deferred. The interest simply accrues, but they don't pay it until the property is transferred or until they pass away and the taxes are paid as part of settling the estate. So indeed, the important thing that town meeting did, the most important item in increasing the eligibility was to increase the limit on the income, and that's what we voted on Monday night. And again, I checked the statistics. By raising the income limit to $52,000, the number of senior household covered rose from about 50% to 70%, probably higher than that, because my numbers are out of date. So I just want to reiterate that as Mr. Doherty said, there is no asset test for this. A very large fraction of Arlington seniors would be able to participate, and they would pay nothing until the time that they transferred their house. Another important point I want to make is that while the interest rate is variable, I think that saying that is confusing, because this does not work like a variable rate mortgage. I spoke to someone on the Finance Committee, and they said they weren't too concerned that the interest rates were low, because as the interest rates rise, the town will be collecting more interest on these deferred taxes. That's not really true. The way this program works is that when you defer your taxes over a period of years, it's like getting a fixed rate loan for each year. Once the interest rate is established for a particular year, it sticks with that year. So if you were to borrow currently at 1.75%, you will never pay more than 1.75% on this year's taxes. And I've spoken to Mr. Gilligan about this. He can confirm the methodology for doing the calculation. What that means is that if somebody defers their taxes for 30 years and interest rates go back up again, they are only paying 1.75% on that deferred amount, while the town conceivably is borrowing at a much higher interest rate. So the other point I think I've already made is that there is an 8% cap. That cap is set by state law. Some people have thought the float rate should be able to go higher than that. It cannot. And the other point related to that cap is that the selectmen's vote does not mention that 8% cap. I would read that vote as inconsistent with state law and potentially flawed because it doesn't contain that cap. So in conclusion, I'd like to say I really do appreciate Senator Donnelly bringing this matter forward. When we discussed this in 2006, the reports, I think, of both the selectmen and the Finance Committee were very clear that we'd revisit this in a year or two. Obviously, that didn't happen, and frankly, I'm not sure if Senator Donnelly hadn't taken the initiative that we'd even be here tonight discussing it again. But I think it's prudent for the town not to decrease the interest rate as much as the selectmen are proposing, and I offer my amendment as a middle ground. It will reduce the rates to something that's more consistent with long-term borrowing, but it will protect the town's interest, and it will not at all decrease the eligibility of any seniors for this program. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Mahan.
Hi, Diane Mahan, member of the Board of Selectmen. I just want to say on warrant article 29 and 30, since they were discussed together at the Selectmen's warrant article hearing that I was not present at, I want to apologize. I had a family situation I had to deal with. So in light of that, I want to join with my colleagues, Ms. Rowe, Mr. Dunn, and Ms. LaCourte, and also vote in an affirmative on 29 and 30, and applaud everybody who are trying to think about our seniors and those on a fixed income as a result of the 2011 override, which we're all very grateful for, possibly providing them some relief. So I'd just like to let town meeting know I'd like to be recorded in the affirmative of the 3-0 vote from the Board of Selectmen to make it 4-0 on 29 and 30. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tosti.
The Finance Committee voted unanimously to support the recommended vote of the Board of Selectmen. I think there's a few reasons for that. And I think one has been mentioned is that, the last override was about a 10% increase in taxes. And I remember opening my bill and saying, whoa, it's one thing to think about it in general at a ballot question, it's another to actually get the tax bill. Of course, it was higher because it was all put on the last two bills, because it wasn't on the first two, but still, it was an increase in taxes. I think the Finance Committee felt in discussing this at the sessions and after the Selectmen's action that the Selectmen's action is reasonable, that we shouldn't be making a profit. In other words, if we're going to do this, that we shouldn't be charging more than it costs the town. And even at 1.75% for, say, the next year, that's still above what it's actually costing the town to borrow if we had to borrow revenue anticipation notes. So we're probably still making a small profit, but certainly not near what it would be if it was at 6%. So I think the Selectmen's motion, to a certain degree, is a compromise by itself. You're going to take this money now and invest it. Can you make more than 1.75%? Well, yeah, if you go into Pakistani war bonds or something like that. At a short-term basis, look at the CDs, look at the treasuries, look at the any investments that you have now. Money markets, both bank and brokerage money markets, they're paying like 0.5%. So you're not making a profit. The only way you're going to make a profit is if you go out and invest long term, like a 20-year bond, or put it in the stock market. And I don't think you're going to see that happen. Is it frozen for a year? Yes, it's like a one-year CD. And interest rates usually don't move quite that fast. They could also go down as well as go up, though one could think they can't really go down much further than that. Do we anticipate a huge number of people taking this? Probably not. There's a large number of people who simply don't want to do it. It goes against the values they have or something like that. They just won't do it. How many will take advantage of this? Well, we just don't know. The experience, I think, in other towns has been that there won't be a huge wave, but this can provide some relief for people who might really, really need it. And if it does become a problem a year or two down the line, that the treasurer has to go out and borrow revenue anticipation notes, and it's costing the town a lot of money, this is a one-year thing. We could come back at a future town meeting and change it back to 6% or 4% or whatever we want. But I think it's worthwhile to give this a try for a year to bring some relief to people who really need it, and especially, again, after, to use my baseball again, they stepped to the plate and helped us last June, and maybe it's our turn to step to the plate and help some people who need it. So the Finance Committee, again, unanimously supports the recommendation of the Board of Selectmen. Thank you.